You're listening to the Clear Creek Resources podcast from Clear Creek Community Church. To hear more, check out clearcreekresources.org.
All right, Lindsay, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you very much.
All right, so before we jump in, give people an idea of who you are. So in addition to being my wife, tell us about yourself.
Well, yes, that's correct. I am your wife.
Of almost 16 years?
Almost 16 years. Glad you got that right.
Yeah.
You usually keep track more than I do. Yes, and we have 3 children, 11, 9, and 7, right?
Right, yes,
Okay.
Almost 11. But
Almost
yes.
11, yeah, this week. And I am a professional counselor, a licensed social worker. And I work a lot with teenagers and young adults. It's kind of where I hone in on. And what else?
So when we're talking today about body image and food, and maybe talk a little bit about your background and your passion for that topic.
Well, I would say I'm passionate for 2 reasons. One is my own personal experience with body image, and I would say just kind of my own journey of healing from kind of what our culture has made it. And then also just professionally working with a lot of particularly adolescents and young women and men too, that it is very rare for me not to hear that is a struggle with a client that I'm seeing. And so it's just so embedded in our culture, and I so badly want to see our culture make a change with that. Because of how it affects lives. And I see that on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, when we're doing this series called Table Talk, and we're talking about where faith meets food. And so when we have conversations about food and all the good things that food provides for us, how it can help us worship God and all these good things, within our own hearts, we can twist that. And so food for many people within our culture, it gets attached to body image and all those different things. And so I thought it would be good for us to have a conversation about the dark side, I guess, to food, and how our hearts can somehow twist those things into not so good things. But yet the food itself can still remain good. And so as we begin some of this discussion, it might be helpful for us to even begin by talking about how body image is looked upon within our culture today. So recently, back in September, there was an article from the Wall Street Journal that sort of uncovered that the Facebook company, which owns Instagram, did some internal research over the years and found that Instagram negatively affects the mental health of its users, particularly young teenage girls when it comes to body image, which is probably not all that surprising for us. But what was the uncovering of it, what was, I guess, shocking for the world to see was that Instagram and Facebook knew about this, but yet has been tried to keep that quiet. There's other research that shows that 40% of elementary school girls, 40% of girls, and 25% of elementary school boys want to be thinner. So it's not just teens, it's even at a younger age. So much so that 80% of 10-year-olds have a fear of growing up to be fat.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, right?
It's a big deal.
And it's not just even, teens or kids, because what happens is those people grow up to be adults, and 80% of women, 34% of men are dissatisfied with their bodies. So it is a pervasive issue across all different age groups and demographics within our culture. And so, I'm not sure if you're seeing some of those same things in the counseling office and the other parents that you interact with, but I don't know what that's been like for you to see.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the what you said about the 80% of 10-year-olds are afraid of being fat, I think that's a major red flag. And we can point to just what our culture has made it, how, first of all, fat has become a bad word, and has such a negative connotation. And I think just, it would be really interesting to just ask kids that age, like what they mean when they say that. But it's it's concerning because our culture is so embedded in diet culture that it's everywhere, right? It's on the billboards, it's in the movies, it's in the books that our kids read, it's in the way that we talk, it's in how the parents are talking. We see health as what we physically look like. And so if you are thin, then you are healthy, I think is kind of where we've landed as a society. And at least now, I don't think that's what it was, 100 years ago, but thin equals healthy. And what's so sad about that is that we all have different bodies and different body types, right? And some of us are born into thinner bodies, and some of us have larger bodies. And so one thing that I say to my kids a lot is we all have different bodies. Some of us are in larger bodies, some of us are in smaller bodies, but all bodies are good bodies. And so you have the girl, right? The 10-year-old girl who's maybe has a larger body. That's just how God created her body to be more athletic built or whatever it might be. And she is going to kill herself to not eat as much as she can, to be as thin as she can, when her body was never meant to look like that. But she wants her body to look like that because that's what our culture says is beautiful and important. And so it's just devastating, really, when you think about that.
Yeah. It seems like it's closely tied to even just identity. And so, we have a certain body image. People look at their body and they think about their body in a certain way, but then now we've attached a deeper meaning to that. So now there's a value to that, to their body can either degrade or enhance their value of how they look at themselves or how other people would view them. It has to do with all those things about love and acceptance and all those things. So I mean, there's an identity that we're attaching to those certain body types and body shapes and weights and things like that.
Well, yeah, and I think too, as a culture, that we, it's like acceptable to comment on people's bodies. Like it's, if you lose weight as an adult, all your friends are praising you for, oh, you look so good. Oh, you look, and it's, the praising comes around the thinner you are. And if you have gained weight or, remained a normal weight, then that praise doesn't happen. And that happens, the kids see that. The kids see us doing that as parents. They see us doing that as friends. And so that's when I think that connection starts to happen. Oh, when I look this way, then people notice, and I am praised for that. And so I would love to see a shift of just, let's not comment on people's bodies ever. Like, why do that? What's the point, Yeah. And so that is something that I've tried to change in my own life, of how I comment on my own body and how I comment and just really trying to stop commenting on other people's bodies. And praise them for who they are on the inside, the heart.
And I think for most people, when they're making a comment like that, I mean, they don't mean to come off that way. I mean, it's like, they're not trying to attach an identity to certain those things, or, now that you have attained this weight, now you're good. Now you're a good person.
Right.
And I think oftentimes the heart behind it is to acknowledge the effort, or, if someone has some sort of goal or something in mind, and they're trying to, encourage them in whatever they were trying to pursue in that.
Yeah.
But what I hear you saying is that even in our attempt to be encouragement and then try to, spur someone along, that sometimes the way that our hearts can sometimes turn some of those things, just because I guess there's a brokenness within us that we struggle with that, right? We take that that good encouragement and somehow say, okay, well now, there's a positive reinforcement for me to do this thing, which means I need to go get more of that. And then it starts to develop into some negative, some behaviors that are not helpful for us spiritually or physically or mentally in all those different areas.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, I am important if, I am noticed if, I am beautiful if, and we start to attach how we look physically to complete that sentence. And it starts as young people. And what's sad is that as adults, we're the ones that are modeling that, but we're so immersed in diet culture ourselves that we don't even recognize the impact that that's having. And so first we have to do that work as adults ourselves, so that then we can pass that down, right, to the next generation.
Yeah. So what do you think how does diet culture show up in an everyday life for many of us? How do you see it show up?
Well, I think the counter question to that would be, how do we not see it show up? You can just think of the way that we talk about our body, the way that we talk about food. So, for example, one thing that I've thought about as we've done this series, Table Talk, when we're talking about coming to the table together and enjoying food and using it as an opportunity to celebrate and to have people in our home and to, even share the gospel, to invite our neighbor friends over. I just kept thinking, if myself 5 years ago, I would have been very much so trying to engage with the people at the table, but I also would be scanning the table, looking at the food, assessing what food in my mind is good food, what's the bad food, what food is okay for me to eat, what food's not okay for me to eat, how much calories might this have, or whatever diet I may have, mindset I may have at that time. Where does that fit into kind of my plan? And it takes away from, my mind is so consumed with the food and how it impacts my physical body and what I want that to look and feel like, that I'm not able to fully engage with the people around me, right? And so I become 90% focused on the food and 10% focused on the people. And so I think a good indicator of being immersed in diet culture is asking ourselves, how much are we thinking about food on a daily basis? And if you are thinking about food a lot, then that's a good indicator that there's something going on there, right? Because I don't think that's how God intended it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think about even how, we can, within our culture and our own minds, I guess, we can attach good or bad to a certain body type or weight or size or whatever. Then we also do the same thing with food, as you mentioned, right? We sort of categorize food as in good food and bad food. And I see it showing up as in like, oh, well, I ate bad yesterday, or I ate bad earlier today, and so now I'm going to be good for this meal. And so I'm going to have whatever's in the good category. I'm going to have a salad for lunch because I had a bad breakfast. And so we attach these like moral labels to not just our bodies, but even the food that we eat. And so there sort of feeds in that same cycle that like, all right, this food is good or bad, which then is going to make my body become good or bad, which then I'm finding my identity, my acceptance, and all those things. And then it starts to really spiral, right?
Because then it goes from, okay, my body is good or bad based on how it looks, to I am good or bad. I am a good person if I'm eating healthy, if I'm exercising, if my body is kind of morphing into what culture deems as acceptable. And so it goes beyond just our bodies, right? It goes to I am this person. And then that gets exasperated with the comments that people make to kind of, continue to praise that. And again, it's so ingrained in us that it takes intentionality, it takes focus, it takes purpose to start to unravel that and to ask yourself the hard questions. And I think part of what comes with that is a grief, doing some grieving work, loss work on that. May mean that I am stopping to strive to have a certain body, which may mean that my body wasn't made to look like that. So there's a term, you've heard me talk about it, thin privilege.
I don't know.
Heard me?
I don't know if I've heard you talk about that. No.
Oh, yeah. So you could Google that and come up with stuff, but thin privilege, or maybe don't Google that, I'll just tell you. Thin privilege is people that are naturally born into a thin body. So they can eat whatever they want, and they're going to continue to have a thigh gap. Like, it's just how their body was. Now, in the inside, they might be about to have a heart attack. Who knows? But on the outside, their body is just made to be thin. That's just what it looks like, right? And then others of us are, have larger body types or more athletic builds or whatever that might be. We're taller, broader, and all of that is good too. But when we strive to have a certain body type that we aren't made to have, then we have to do some kind of restriction. We have to do some kind of forcing ourselves to get there by counting our food, by counting macros, by counting calories, by doing all these things. And instead of just embracing how God made our body, eating well, I'm not talking about, going and eating hamburgers every day. I'm like, eat well, eat how your body feels good, what charges you up, which gives you energy, move your body, exercise it, all these things, right? But then we grieve the body that we want to have that we weren't meant to have. In order for me to have a thigh gap, I have to eat only lettuce and vegetables and fruit every day, which I tried at certain points in my life. And I got praised for that, and it felt good in the moment. And then I woke up one day and I was like, oh my gosh, like I have restricted so many different things I'm no longer enjoying food. I'm thinking about food 90% of the day, about what's going to keep me looking like this. And so when I decided to make a shift and to do some recovery work for myself, then that looked like grieving that, being like, I'm not going to have a thigh gap. Like, it's not how God created me. And that is okay. And that is still beautiful. And that is still, I'm still taking care of my body, even if I don't look like this. Mm-hmm. That was a really long explanation.
No, that was great. That was really great. I read a statistic that said of 70% of women who have a normal body weight, considered like the median or median body weight, 70% still want to weigh less. So I mean, even kind of what you're saying is recognizing that like this is what's considered a medically normal body weight, but yet I'm still unhappy, and so I have to strive to have something different. Yeah. So what is? We said the food is not necessarily good or bad. We can't label it in those categories, but yet there is a goodness to food. We've talked about that within like this series, that like food has a purpose, has a God honoring purpose. And so, in your mind, what is that purpose?
Yeah. Well, Ryan, you could answer this question too. I think that the purpose is that God gave it. Well, right, when we look at just the beginning, God created all things. And so God created food, God created the things that make the food, God created it all, right? And so it is meant to be enjoyed. We are meant to, I think, to be satisfied by food. It is meant to fuel our bodies and to give our bodies what we need to get through each day. Excuse me. And, I think a lot of what our diet culture has done has said, this is how many calories you need in order to look like this, and which causes us, again, right, to focus on it. I think food is meant to just be a part of our day, but not something that rules our day or rules our thoughts. It's meant to be something that we, celebrate with people, like what we've talked about in this series, that we use to celebrate and enjoy people. What would you add to that?
I mean, all those things. The only thing I would even take that step further is it is meant to direct our hearts towards God, right? And so, just like so many other things in life, it's a good thing that is sustains our body. We're supposed to enjoy it, and all those enjoyment and sustenance and provision and gratitude is ultimately meant to be directed towards God Himself. And so, like anything else, when we focus on that thing that's supposed to aid in our worship of God, that's idolatry. Is that we're no longer worshiping God, we're worshiping that thing. And so whether that is what we're talking about, just an overemphasis on food, that's a form of idolatry. Is we're taking this thing that God has created to help us to worship Him in different ways, and now we're worshiping that thing, and because it's ultimately serving our body, which idolatry is always in its end is about worshiping ourselves. It's taking something, worshiping that thing because of how it makes us feel, what it does for us. It completes our identity in that. And so the quest, the journey, that you're talking about to view food differently is almost like to view food with a gospel lens, right? I mean, you explain like the storyline of the gospel and how food fits into there, that you have food it's part of God's good creation, but yet because of the brokenness within our own hearts, we twist those things and we find our identity in that, and then we idolize that food. We idolize our own bodies instead of worshiping God. But the answer to that is to have this reorientation, this redefinition of food in our view of self that finds our identity not in how we look, but in what Christ has done for us and who he's created us to be. We don't find our acceptance in how other people view us or view our bodies. We find our acceptance in Christ alone, that knowing that God in his grace loves and accepts us for because Jesus was good for us, not because we try to perform in some certain way. So I guess
you win. That answer is better than mine.
No. I mean,
it was.
So what is it? I mean, what's the vision? I mean, like for you, if you were to think about like how to view food rightly, like how do you do that? Like how do you view food with a gospel lens on a daily basis, like on a meal by meal? Like what's that really look like in your mind?
Well, I think it looks like doing a lot of interpersonal work. I think it looks like examining our own thoughts and feelings around food, around our body, around even how we view other people's bodies, around comparison and how we compare ourselves to other people. I think it looks like repenting of those wrong motives. I think it looks like educating ourselves on what it looks like to maybe heal our relationship from food. For me, that has looked like just learning what it looks like to eat intuitively. And so learning to kind of cue back into my body instead of eating when I'm told to eat or in eating what I'm, told to eat, being able to just kind of cue back in and be like, okay, God, you gave me my stomach and my stomach tells me when I'm hungry. Let me honor my stomach when it's hungry and eat. And let me ask my body in that moment, what would feel good for me to eat right now? What's going to help me feel and fuel me through the day, and not attaching, again, kind of what we talked about earlier, right? Like worth to that or a label to that. And I think that opens up the opportunity to learn to enjoy food again. And then the same thing, right? Learning to cue back into my body, okay, I'm full. God gave us these bodies. They tell us when we need to eat and when we're full. Like when we think about that, like how amazing is it, right? That God made our bodies, but we're so detached from our bodies that we have forgotten how to do that. And so for me, that's part of what it has looked like for me, is just kind of cueing back in, learning how to intuitively kind of think about food and my body and put those things back together. And then, again, doing some of that grief work of redefining beautiful, redefining acceptance, redefining health. I think health is... anyway, it's a whole nother podcast, but redefining health. Is that answering your question a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I hear you say often, or at least you're asking yourself or asking me, for whose glory and for what goal, what end with that. And so, I don't know, when you're asking that question.
To what end and to whose glory?
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
To what end and to whose glory, right? And we can kind of ask ourselves that question for many things in life. Yeah,
not just food. It could be anything, yeah.
Yeah, it could be anything in life. But to what end and to whose glory am I focusing this much on food? To what end and to whose glory is my goal this, to obtain this physique or to obtain this goal? Is it to glorify God? Is it possibly to glorify myself? Is it possibly to, who is getting the glory with these efforts? And what I have found, and I'm not saying this is everyone's experience, but that when I am kind of overly focused on my body, the glory kind of becomes for myself and what I want it to look like versus just treating my body well and feeling it well. So it's a good check-in.
It is
question, right?
I mean, because it's an idolatry question, right? I mean, it's like whose glory? I mean, is it God's glory or is it my glory? I mean, what am I ultimately worshiping here? And the challenge about whenever you're dealing with idolatry, whether it's in your own heart or someone else's heart, you're trying to help walk someone through there. We fight for those things, right? Like there's something that bristles within us whenever something or someone, even if it's ourselves, is going after an idol within our own heart, right? Because that's something that we hold as precious, and so it's even hard to even ask ourselves that question sometimes because we have a tendency to twist that answer. Well, I think ultimately I'm glorifying God because of this, and we can justify our sin because we're masters at it. I mean, I've heard a pastor say that there is no one in your life who has deceived you more than yourself, and I find that's probably true for myself, at least. Like that within our own hearts that we can deceive ourselves and try to find some way out of it. So again, I think it's helpful to have community. I mean, have people around us that can kind of press in on some of those things and encourage us. But yeah,
the other thing I was going to say is that a wise woman once told me that we are only as healthy as our view of God is accurate. And so, right, if our view of God is that He is angry or disappointed in us, and I think a lot of us, again, attach that to how we eat or how we move our bodies. God's disappointed in me that I didn't follow through with my plan or I didn't do X, Y, and Z today. And we see Him, we experience Him as this God, right, that's like shaking His finger at us. Well, it will be really hard for us to be emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally healthy if that's our view of God. And so our view of that more accurate view of God, which, we find in the Bible, right, is His arms are wide open and He accepts and loves us as we are, unconditionally all the time. And so when we embrace God in that light, then we're able to, I think, focus more on our own, or I guess, we can be healthier emotionally, physically, mentally. So we are only as healthy as our view of God is accurate. I think that speaks to lots of areas of life, but can come into this as well.
All right, so let's maybe circle back around to talk about social media, because we began by talking about the impact of social media on body image. So social media is not going to go away. I don't think we have to say, "Oh man, you need to get off social media." Have an outright ban for everyone. That's the only way to keep your wits about you. But how, what would you say to somebody who is struggling with social media, whether or not it's, trying to limit some social media, or even like, what is your mindset as you're scrolling through something like an Instagram? How would you encourage someone if that is a place for them where they are, I don't know, those things are just bubbling up for them?
Well, this is kind of a soapbox for me, so I gotta like think that through. Oh man, it's so complicated, right? It's so complicated. I think research would show that, particularly for adolescents, that depression, anxiety, eating disorders, all of those are on the increase. Since I did a talk about this, 2009, kind of when social media started, that the numbers for those mental illnesses have raised quite a bit. So that's evidence right there that we need to pay attention to that. One thing that I have done personally, and that I encourage my clients to do, is certainly doing a detox of social media, getting off of it completely could be helpful, but I know that that's not necessarily the answer for some, and it hasn't even been for myself. I'm still on social media. I enjoy keeping up with people, and it's how I, see what different friends that I don't live here are doing. But I no longer follow people that maybe have triggered me in my own recovery, or or talk a lot about their bodies or post things about their diets or even, just different very food-related posts, things that I just noticed made me feel worse instead of better. So I encourage clients first to kind of like go through and do a clean out. Like, okay, what are the people that are kind of coming up on a frequent basis that are triggering to you? And then maybe follow people that give a different spin to that. And so health at every size, intuitive eating, that's not always 100% either, but you have to be careful. But that just gives a different message, kind of more of a radical view of what our culture, views as healthy. Helps you kind of understand that a little bit better. And so again, right, what is the purpose? What is the goal of social media, and how is it helping you, or how is it hurting you is always a good question to ask, especially for, well, not just adolescents, all of us, really.
Yeah, everyone. And I think it's helpful to even have some of those conversations with kids. I mean, knowing that social media, particularly Instagram, Facebook even knows that this is an issue for adolescents, especially young girls. And so, if you have young kids that are on social media, to begin dialoguing about some of those things and seeking to help them redefine food, in a way that is a more gospel perspective, So trying to discover that for yourself, but then also trying to do that within your own home. And I know that's something that we've talked about with our kids of we've struggled. Because we're learning some of that language ourselves about how, what is healthy food versus unhealthy food, or good food versus bad food. Okay, so what is a helpful way to talk about that with our kids?
Right.
Eating this kind of food is bad because it's got lots of sugar. Okay, now let's talk about that. No, that can be a good thing, right? And you can have that sort of thing in moderation. Now, it's not something that you'd want to have tons and tons and tons of, just because that's not going to fuel and feed our body the way that God wanted us to, but it's something that we can enjoy in moderation. And so trying to redefine some of those things for ourselves and then trying to pass those on to our kids. And
it's hard. It's
hard,
really hard to do. And we haven't always agreed about how to do that, right? And I think and we have a daughter who's about to be 11. She's becoming more aware of her body, and it's hard. It is complicated. It is complicated. But it is, if we can, I think, just continue to ask ourselves those hard questions, to do some of that interpersonal work ourselves, so that we can kind of be more aware of our language and how that may impact other people around us or our children, then I think we're headed in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I think that's this is just sort of a rabbit trail off of the Table series, but that's really what we're trying to get to with this series is let's talk about all this within a gospel context of how can we gather around the table with people where food is not the focus, and even the relationships aren't the focus. Ultimately, our focus is on God, but we want to have that community that's going to help us to do that. We want to draw people in and welcome them around this table, and it be a picture of the gospel, and we can enjoy this food as a picture of the gospel.
Yeah.
So, cool.
Yeah. 100%.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Well, you're welcome, Ryan.
It was great to be able to hang out again. I guess I'll see you later.
I will. I will see you later.
All right. Hey, thanks for checking out this video. If you haven't yet, make sure that you hit subscribe down below and check out ClearCreekResources.org, where we have videos, books, and sermons on there, as well as our audio podcast. Thanks for watching.